Have you ever had 3 armed guards knock on your door at 6:00 a.m.? That's how my vacation morning started. I was still in pajama pants, clutching a chipped coffee mug, blinking at a clipboard shoved in my face like it had just been sworn in by the Supreme Court. "You have 48 hours to vacate this property," the tallest one barked, like he was auditioning for a direct-to-DVD cop movie. Behind him, their SUV sat idling in my driveway, gleaming white with Pinewood Lake Community Association stenciled on the side in tasteful navy letters. Tasteful, if you're into tyrannical Helvetica. The eviction notice was thick enough to use as kindling, citing violations I'd never heard of on land I'd supposedly trespassed onto, and just like that, I was being kicked off the porch of a cabin my family had owned since gas was under $1. 30 guys with matching polos and matching power trips had just declared war, and they didn't even know what kind of accountant I was. But first, leave a comment below to let us know where you are watching from, and if you like fascinating stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we have another incredible story, and there are many surprises waiting for you in the next parts. Let me rewind. This cabin wasn't just a house. It was a memory palace. Every beam, every dent in the hardwood floor had a story. Grandpa and I spent summers here, catching fish too small to brag about, and building card towers that always collapsed right before bedtime. The walls smelled like campfire smoke and pine sap, like 1993 frozen in wood grain. I hadn't been back since I was 15. After my parents' divorce turned our family traditions into a rotating custody calendar. When Grandpa passed away last winter at 92, I inherited the place. After surviving tax season and about 3 dozen corporate fraud cases, I figured I'd earned a break. The drive up had been therapy, watching the cityscape dissolve into farmland and then pines. The first evening I cracked open a beer on the porch and watched the lake bleed orange into the horizon. For the first time in months, my shoulders dropped from my ears. I fell asleep dreaming of fixing the leaky kitchen faucet and maybe even building the dock Grandpa always wanted. Then I woke up to be told I was illegally squatting on my own family's land. Still stunned, I wandered down to the old dock where Grandpa taught me to bait a hook and curse in 2 languages. The dock creaked just like I remembered, a wood-plank lullaby. That's where I met Shanley Maddox, a wiry man with a faded ball cap and the kind of voice that had spent years explaining things no one believed. "You must be George's grandson," he said, shaking my hand like he meant it. He looked around cautiously before leaning in like he was about to spill state secrets. That Doris Clark's doing. HOA president turned local tyrant. She's been trying to push out all the old owners. Started her own development firm and wants the lakefront cleared for condos. Your grandpa gave her hell before his health went. My stomach dropped. Shanley went on, telling me how Doris had turned the HOA into a private fiefdom where bylaws were weapons and inspections were drive-by shakedowns. She didn't run an HOA, he said. She ran a suburban regime with rules sharp enough to draw blood. My grandfather hadn't just died of age. According to Shanley, he'd been bullied into the grave, and now they were coming for what was left. Back inside, I opened the eviction envelope, which was about as friendly as a ransom note. According to this glorified scare packet, my cabin was built 50 feet into common HOA land and, therefore, in violation of community ordinances, posing a safety threat and devaluing nearby properties. The map they included looked like it had been drawn by a sleep-deprived intern with access to Microsoft Paint. My name was spelled wrong, the lot lines didn't match what I remembered, and the violation zone was highlighted like it was radioactive. It was clear this was intimidation dressed up in administrative drag. But I'm not just any CPA. I'm a forensic accountant, which means I read fine print like it owes me money. These people were trying to gaslight me off my own porch, and I hadn't even unpacked my toothbrush yet. That evening, while checking the dock again, I noticed something odd. Fresh scratches on the posts, knots in the rope, little signs that someone had been mooring boats here while the cabin sat empty. I asked Shanley, who was puttering around his tomato garden. He snorted. "Oh yeah, Doris has been renting out the dock. $200 a weekend. You've got the deepest access and best trout spot on this side of the lake. She's probably made a few grand since your grandpa passed." My jaw clenched. Not only were they trying to evict me, they'd already been cashing in on the property. While I was grieving, Doris was charging tourists for my memories. That's when I remembered something Grandpa once said, half joking while teaching me poker. "Never show your full hand, son. You never know who's bluffing." I went back inside, determined to find the rest of Grandpa's cards, because something told me he hadn't folded. Not yet. I found it tucked behind an old board game in the back of the bookshelf, wedged so tightly between a Monopoly box and a rusted thermos that I nearly missed it. A tan folder with duct tape on the spine, and one label in neat block lettering. Pinewood Lake. Luck on Death. My grandfather didn't write things in all caps unless he meant it, like a warning. Inside, a 1963 land survey, yellowed and creased, but unmistakably official, and a slim, leather-bound journal filled with his distinct, deliberate handwriting. Property lines drawn by hand, matching the cabin layout, from memory, not from whatever laughable map the HOA had handed me. The journal was something else entirely. A running record of disputes, visits from HOA officials, notes on boundary stakes, and notations about meetings that smelled more like pressure campaigns than community updates. That night, I sat at the table where we used to play gin rummy, and whispered to the dark, "Why would a man hide a land deed? Because he knew someone would try to steal it." And judging by what I was reading, Doris had been trying for years. The next morning, I was out by the tree line rechecking boundary markers when I saw her. Hiking boots, flannel shirt, a Nikon camera strapped to her shoulder like a sidearm. She was crouched over the line, squinting at a stake like it owed her money. "Can I help you?" I asked, still running on coffee and adrenaline. She looked up, startled, then relaxed into a casual smile. "You must be Carwyn. I'm Era Finley. I inherited the cabin just north of yours from my aunt. Shanley told me you'd run into..." Doris, her tone said it all. Over coffee on her porch, she explained that she was an environmental attorney, mostly retired but always ready for a good scrap. Doris had tried to hit her with a $10,000 0 cents fine for a shed that was 6 inches off the property line. I showed her the zoning statute and reminded her trespassing was still illegal in Minnesota, she said. Deadpan. She backed off, but she doesn't forget. We clicked fast. Her courtroom calm and my spreadsheet paranoia made for a weirdly effective partnership. And if I'm being honest, she had courtroom eyes and hiking boots, my kind of welcome committee. Together we spread the original survey, Doris's fake map, and the eviction notice across my kitchen table. The mismatch wasn't just a clerical error. It was a land grab. The original survey showed my grandfather's lot extending a full 70 feet farther than the HOA claimed, right to the natural shoreline. More importantly, it included the entire cove. Deep water, perfect for boats, and coincidentally, the exact location where construction had already begun for the new community dock. Ira leaned over the table, tapping her finger at the lines like she was pointing out battle positions. "She's not just trying to take your cabin," she said. "She needs this land for her marina. Without it, her whole development falls apart." I stared at the glossy brochure I'd found online for Pinewood Lake luxury living, showing yachts parked in front of glass condos. "She wasn't building homes," I muttered. "She was building a Ponzi scheme wrapped in stucco, and if Doris thought I'd fold like some overextended retiree, she'd clearly never dealt with a forensic accountant during tax season." When Doris finally showed up in person, she didn't knock, she marched. Out of her white SUV in a cream-colored pantsuit like she was running a fashion show for litigation. 2 men followed her, clipboards in hand, the HOA version of Secret Service. "Mr. Porter," she chirped, not even pretending to smile. "We're conducting a routine compliance inspection," she pointed at the deck railing. "That violates Code 3.4 regarding safety standards." Then at my grandfather's old fishing boat. "Unregistered watercraft must be removed or face a fine." Then she actually pointed at a squirrel feeder. "Unauthorized wildlife attractions, $50 0 cents penalty." I took a deep breath, plastered on my accountant's audit day smile, and said, "Ms. Clark, there's been a mistake. I have documentation proving this is private property. You're trespassing." She didn't flinch. "Those outdated documents were superseded years ago. The community has evolved, Mr. Porter. If you'd attended the HOA meetings, you'd know that." "Right," I said. "I'll be sure to catch the next bake sale and land seizure presentation." One of her assistants snapped a photo of my car. I gave him a thumbs up. "Make sure you get my good side." Honestly, she fined me for bird feeder placement. Next up, charges for breathing unpermitted air. After she left, still smirking like she'd won a chess game I hadn't agreed to play, I called the county assessor's office. I wanted a second opinion, an official one. Turns out my grandfather had applied for a full reassessment just 6 months before his death. The results had come in quietly and been filed away, because that's what honest paperwork does. It waits to be found. The assessor emailed me a scanned copy of the findings. There it was in black and white, the land boundary matching the 1963 survey, including full shoreline access and riparian water rights. My fingers tingled reading it. Grandpa didn't fight with fists, I whispered to myself. He fought with paperwork. And he was winning posthumously. I printed 3 copies, laminated one, and tacked it to my wall. The next move wasn't going to be reactive. It was going to be calculated. Doris thought she was kicking a weak man off his porch. What she didn't know was that I had just inherited the kind of legal landmine that blows up careers, developments, and egos wrapped in pantsuits. The letter was tucked inside the back cover of Grandpa's journal, creased in the middle and sealed with yellowing tape. It was addressed to me in handwriting that had once helped me with math homework and under-the-table poker strategy. I unfolded it slowly, like it might crack apart if I breathed too hard. "Carwin, I fought them as long as I could, but I'm too old and tired to continue. They'll come after the property when I'm gone. The truth is in the surveys. Don't let them take what's rightfully yours. I should have stood stronger. Maybe you can finish what I couldn't." I sat there, heart thudding, reading the words over and over. It wasn't just ink on paper. It was a call to arms from beyond the grave. Knew. He saw it coming, and he had left behind every breadcrumb I needed. Legal, emotional, strategic. The man had taught me how to fish, sure, but apparently he'd also taught me how to fight a paper war with the precision of a sniper. And now, armed with the deed, the journal, and a boiling need for justice, I planned to do exactly that. Era showed up that afternoon with a laptop and a grim expression. "I've been digging," she said, skipping the greetings. Doris filed her development plans with 3 different agencies. What she told the tourism board says one thing, and what she submitted to the Environmental Protection Office says something else entirely. I raised an eyebrow. "That's not just shady. That's regulatory schizophrenia." She spun the laptop around. "Here's the kicker. The condo plans require heavy dredging, way more than she admitted in the environmental impact statement. She's either clueless or betting that no one would cross-recommend it." We both knew which one it was. Doris wasn't stupid. She was just used to being unopposed. "Turns out her Lakeview dream," Era said, tapping the screen, "could drown in paperwork. She's violating wetland protection statutes. And 3 of the 5 county commissioners who'd vote to approve her permits, they're on her investor list. Classic small-town corruption, 1 part nepotism, 2 parts backroom bourbon, all wrapped in a smile that says community values. We weren't just dealing with HOA drama anymore. This was full-blown racketeering with a picket fence. The next step was surveillance. I bought a set of motion-stringeted security cameras online, the kind hunters use to track deer. Except my deer wore cardigans and carried clipboards. I installed one on the porch, another near the dock, and a third angled at the back window after finding a boot print outside. Within 24 hours, they delivered a highlight reel straight out of a suburban crime show. HOA board members lurking near my car, snapping pictures of my fuse box. One guy even tried the back door handle like he was casing the place for a break-in. Another night, I caught someone repositioning one of the boundary stakes I'd reset using the official county survey. At this point, I had to ask myself, if they treat the law like a suggestion, what's next? HOA watching them tiptoe around my property like raccoons in matching polos would have been funny if it weren't so disturbingly real. I cataloged every video clip, time-stamped and backed up twice. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It was proof. Then came the pettiness parade. I spent the weekend placing brand-new survey stakes along my property line using the county's verified coordinates. These weren't little plastic flags. They were waist-high rebar rods, topped with neon orange caps and solar-powered lights. They ran in a perfect line from my driveway, slicing right through what the HOA had been calling the community garden and ending 2 feet from their beloved gazebo. That gazebo, mind you, had been built partially on my land. I double-checked. Twice. "You sure you want to provoke them?" Era asked. I just smiled. This isn't provocation, it's illumination. Like drawing a chalk outline around their lies. And sure enough, the next day HOA members were out there squinting at the stakes like they were alien monoliths. One board member tripped over one while filming my front porch. I waved from my window and offered him a Gatorade. He declined. I still regret not filming that. But nothing topped what happened at dawn 2 days later. I was in my bathrobe, sipping bad instant coffee and arguing with the toaster when I heard the unmistakable sound of a diesel engine backing up my driveway. I looked out the window and there it was, a tow truck, already halfway through hooking up my sedan. I ran out, barefoot, waving my hands like a man being chased by bees. "Excuse me, what exactly do you think you're doing?" The driver, a teenager with pimples and regret in his eyes, held up a crumpled work order. "HOA paperwork says this vehicle's illegally parked in a shared access zone." "Shared by whom?" I barked. "This is my driveway," he shrugged. "Look, man, I don't get paid enough for this." "Good," I said. "Then you won't mind unhitching my car before I call the sheriff and report vehicle theft." To his credit, he didn't argue. He lowered the car gently and handed me the paperwork like it was radioactive. As he drove off, I stood there in my robe, wild-haired and victorious, probably looking like the ghost of homeowner lawsuits past. Back inside, I tossed the paper on the counter and opened Grandpa's deed one more time. And that's when I saw it. Riparian rights. Not just land to the water, but legal control over access to the water itself. The lake, the dock, even the marina space Doris had started building. It all ran through my family's rights. She didn't just pick the wrong fight, she picked the wrong lake. I took my grandfather's survey, the county's reassessment letter, and the legal documents outlining my riparian rights straight to the harbor master, a no-nonsense guy named Jeffrey Taylor who looked like he'd spent 20 years on docks and didn't have time for HOA drama. He reviewed everything, flipping through the pages with a slow frown and tapping his pen like it was a lie detector. After a few minutes, he leaned back and said, "Well, I'll be damned. You're not just the shoreline owner, you've got water rights over the entire cove." He adjusted his glasses, then added, "Technically, that means any structure over that water, including the HOA's dock, requires your written consent." I just blinked. "So all the boats, all the dock space they've been renting out?" He nodded. "That's your water, Mr. Porter." I walked out of that office feeling 10 feet tall. Turns out, the HOA's golden goose had been laying eggs on my water, and I held the deed to the hen house. But if you think vindication is quiet, you've never ticked off a wealthy HOA president with marina dreams and political connections. The news spread faster than a grease fire in a cornfield. Some neighbors applauded. Others glared at me like I'd poisoned their labradoodle. Someone spray-painted "sellout" on my mailbox, and a pile of nails appeared in my driveway one morning like it had rained spite. I started noticing more "for sale" signs in front yards, whispered conversations stopping when I walked by. The isolation crept in, slow and choking. One night, sitting in my car with a sandwich that tasted like cardboard, I called my mom. I hadn't cried in front of her since my divorce, but I almost did when she picked up. Maybe it's not worth it, I said quietly. Maybe I should just walk away. She didn't speak for a second, then said, Carwin, your grandfather gave you that land because he knew you were strong enough to defend it. Don't let a bully in a blazer scare you into giving up what's yours. I didn't sleep much that night, but I woke up with new resolve and an unexpected ally at my door. Era, wearing work gloves and a Not Today HOA t-shirt, stood next to Shanley, who held a box labeled Grandpa's Clock. Time to fight fire with facts, she said. Turns out, the old man wasn't just preparing surveys, he was preparing surveillance. That vintage clock from the living room wasn't just keeping time, it was hiding a camera, cleverly disguised and aimed squarely at the front door. We played the footage and watched in stunned silence as Doris herself directed workers to remove anything valuable from inside the cabin. Take family photos, legal stuff, whatever looks important. I want him disoriented when he comes back, Shanley growled. She broke in like a burglar with a real estate license. I catalogued every frame, every voice. We had her, not just HOA violations. This was criminal intent on video. Era and I started jokingly calling ourselves the HOA resistance, but behind the humor was something sharper. We weren't just defending property anymore. We were defending principle. I filed for an emergency injunction the next morning, attaching video evidence, boundary documentation, and a full timeline of HOA harassment. Then I built a website. Nothing fancy, just a clear, evidence-loaded chronicle of what was happening. Surveillance videos, legal filings, even scans of the bird feeder fine. I titled it Pinewood Truth and shared it in every community Facebook group, email thread, and dog-walking bulletin board I could reach. It spread like wildfire. People started emailing me their own horror stories, fines for having wind chimes, threats over the color of lawn chairs, and pressure to sell at below-market offers. It was bigger than me now. Rhetorically speaking, if paperwork was a weapon, I was now fully armed and ready to aim. And then the bomb went off. Someone uploaded a mashup of Doris's break-in footage to YouTube, set to dramatic music, and titled it The Queen of Pinewood Lake. Within 24 hours, it had over 50,000 views. Reddit threads popped up dissecting her tactics like she was a true crime documentary subject. Comments ranged from, "This lady makes Nurse Ratched look like a Girl Scout," to, "Is this even legal?" Even local news got wind of it, airing a segment that dubbed me the accountant who sank the HOA. The footage of Doris barking orders and rifling through my things aired alongside a shot of her community dock, now half dismantled, drifting in the cove like a bloated metaphor. The dock that once symbolized HOA power now floated alone, untethered and exposed. It wasn't just wood on water anymore. It was the visual representation of everything she'd lost. And for the first time in this long, exhausting fight, I started to believe we might just win. The HOA's financial statements were a mess disguised as order, clean fonts, neat formatting, and just enough buzzwords to lull most homeowners into apathy. But I've built careers exposing balance sheet fiction. And once I sat down with Shanley's box of records, the lies weren't just visible, they were screaming. Year after year, the HOA's budgets showed rising administrative costs and development fees, but the roads were crumbling and the security lights didn't work. Pinewood transfers to an entity named Pinewood Community Advancement LLC, which, surprise, was just a shell for Doris's development company. One report even claimed $12,000 was spent on community beautification. Unless that included gold-plated bird feeders and invisible flower beds, it didn't add up. Meeting minutes were obviously doctored, showing unanimous board votes on items residents swore never came up. That's the thing about fraud. It rarely hides in shadows. It hides in plain sight behind big words, vague line items, and the assumption that no one's paying attention. But I was, and I had receipts. I decided to throw a barbecue, not just any cookout, an all-call truce party. Ribs, sweet tea, paper plates with patriotic flags on them. I set up tables along the lakeside, fired up the grill, and put out a hand-lettered sign that read, "Eat free, talk freely." HOA free, thinking encouraged. Neighbors came cautiously at first, drawn by the smell, maybe the hope. And then they stayed. Over hot dogs and coleslaw, they opened up. A couple talked about how their deck remodel was stopped mid-projector after anonymous complaints. A retired teacher said her dues kept rising, but her driveway had potholes big enough to trap raccoons. One guy laughed so hard, beer came out his nose when he heard about my bird feeder fine. "Nothing heals like ribs and righteous anger," I said to Era as she passed out homemade peach cobbler. That afternoon didn't just rebuild community trust. It ignited it. People were tired of being quiet. Turns out, the real HOA problem wasn't just Doris. It was the silence she built around herself. While I was serving pulled pork, the State Environmental Office was serving Doris a cease and desist. Era had filed a complaint, backed with copies of the conflicting documents, highlighting discrepancies in shoreline modification claims. The Tourism Board had blueprints of a 20-slip marina with dredging, while the environmental application claimed minimal disruption. The agency didn't like being lied to, and they certainly didn't like discovering that 3 of the 5 local commissioners had financial ties to the development. Within a week, all permits for Pinewood Lake Luxury Living were suspended pending investigation. The site, once filled with trucks and contractors, emptied like a bad idea in a rainstorm. The metal framing of the luxury clubhouse stood there abandoned, like a skeleton with no skin. The lake, which Doris had tried to tame into a sales pitch, spit her project out like a bad oyster. She'd gambled everything on those permits and lost, and now her plan was rotting faster than the hot dog buns I forgot in the sun. Then came the final act, an emergency HOA board meeting. Doris called it herself, no doubt hoping to rally support or bulldoze her way through new resistance, but I'd done my homework. I walked into that community center with a folding projector, a folder full of screenshots, and an evidence timeline so tight it could snap necks. She tried to open with a preemptive strike, claiming I was destabilizing the neighborhood and weaponizing obscure legal loopholes. I let her ramble. Then I asked to speak. The board hesitated, until Jeffrey Taylor, the harbor master, stood up from the back of the room and said, "Let him present. This affects all of us." That was my cue. I plugged in the projector and started walking them through it. The financial transfers, the fake meeting approvals, the duplicate permits, the fraudulent filings. People gasped. One woman muttered, "We paid dues for this?" But the real blow came when I played the clip-clock camera footage of Doris instructing her workers to take everything that looks important and strip the place clean before he gets back. It landed like thunder. Doris lost it. Her voice rose, shrill and shaky, as she pointed at me with a trembling hand. "You people are so ungrateful. I've carried this community for years. You'd all still be stuck with broken docks and dying grass if it weren't for me." But she didn't stop there. No, she made the mistake every villain makes when they forget they're still on camera. "Once the condos are built," she snapped, "property values will triple, and we can finally get rid of the riffraff who don't belong here." The room froze. Someone was filming with their phone. Another person stood up and shouted, "So that's your plan? Price us out?" It was over. The board called a vote of no confidence right then and there. Unanimous. Doris was removed as HOA president on the spot. She stormed out, but the door didn't slam hard enough to drown out the sound of neighbors clapping, cheering, even laughing. Some cried. For the first time, the community didn't feel like it was being run. It felt like it was being heard. Turns out collective action doesn't need pitchforks. Just truth, unity, and a well-timed projector. The fallout came quick and loud. Within days of Doris's public implosion and removal, her development company tanked. Investors fled, lenders called in notes, and the luxury condos that were supposed to crown Pinewood Lake crumbled, on paper and in public confidence. The county launched a formal investigation into misappropriation of funds, zoning fraud, and environmental violations. Facing lawsuits and mounting debt, Doris had no choice but to sell her lakefront home to cover legal bills. The irony? The same community she tried to gate off for the wealthy now hosted potlucks on the land she once claimed as private paradise. Word has it she's managing a strip mall in Nevada now. Karma wears flip-flops and shops at dollar stores. Meanwhile, Pinewood Lake wasn't just recovering, it was transforming. The board, now under interim president Daniel Atkins, began rewriting policies with homeowner input, transparency, fairness, and no more clipboards with attitude. I started by fixing what had been broken. Literally. My cabin was still standing, but the damage from Doris's break-in and the forced eviction left scars. Windows replaced, paint refreshed, furniture rebuilt with help from neighbors who once watched warily but now brought coffee and elbow grease. The dock, symbol of my grandfather's legacy and Doris's greed, had been half dismantled during the HOA's push to dominate the lake. I rebuilt it stronger. New lumber, new anchors, new lighting, but I left one plank, stained, aged. The one where I'd caught my first fish at age 6. From ruin rose something real. Wood, nails, sweat, and defiance. People started calling it Porter's Pier. I didn't correct him. Grandpa would have smiled at that. One neighbor even painted a little sign. No HOA permits required. It stayed nailed up. Somewhere along the way, Era stopped being just the brilliant hiking boot-wearing lawyer next door. We were spending late nights drafting policy reforms, filing paperwork, drinking bad instant coffee like it was fine bourbon, and laughing more than expected. Her presence became comfort, eventually inevitability. We moved her law practice to town, just a small office above the general store with a view of the lake. Together we founded the Pinewood Legal Defense Fund, seeded with the damages I'd won in court. It was designed to help other homeowners across the state facing abusive HOA tactics, a place for people who didn't have a folder of old surveys or a hidden clock camera. The calls came fast. We helped an elderly couple in Duluth reverse a wrongful lien, and a military widow near Bemidji who was fined for flying her husband's flag. Era called it mission work. I called it redemption. Hers, mine, Grandpa's. With Doris gone and the air finally clear, Pinewood Lake did something no one expected. It got better. At the next community meeting, I proposed a set of bylaws called the Pinewood Property Owners Protection Charter. It was a mouthful, but it got the job done. It banned fines for trivial violations, required 2/3 homeowner approval for any major fee increases, and created a rotating review panel made up of actual residents, not just the loudest people with the most clipboard holsters. To my surprise, it passed unanimously. One neighbor, a retired schoolteacher, whispered from HOA to HOA, "Yeah?" as the crowd clapped. That night, we hosted a celebration on the newly rebuilt dock. There was music, potluck chili, kids fishing off the side, and stories. So many stories. People who'd lived 2 houses apart for 10 years were finally introducing themselves. Turns out fear had been the real fence, and with it gone, neighbors became a community again. As the sun melted into the lake, painting it in gold and rust, I stood on the dock with a thermos of coffee and a head full of memories. I looked over the shoreline, now protected by law and love, and thought of the man who'd started it all. Grandpa, the quiet fighter, the patient planner. I raised my thermos and whispered, "This one's for you, old man." Somewhere in the breeze, I swear I heard a chuckle. The cabin that was nearly stolen had become the heart of something bigger than itself. Kids ran past me laughing, a neighbor waved from a canoe, and Era walked up with 2 mugs of cider. "Still can't believe you laminated the original deed," she teased. I grinned. Sometimes the best weapon isn't a lawyer, it's a laminated survey. We watched the water together, calm for once. No drones, no guards, no HOA inspections, just peace. And yes, I sent Doris a housewarming gift, a beautifully framed, gold-edged copy of the Pinewood Lake 1963 survey, the original one, Grandpa's. I included a note that read, "Just in case you want to know where your property ends. Sincerely, Carwin Porter. P.S. No return address." Because some endings don't need a punch, they just need punctuation. Leave a comment below to let us know where you are watching from. And if you like fascinating stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button because tomorrow we have another incredible story and there are many surprises waiting for you in the next parts.